So thank you all for coming to this talk. As you know, we're going to have D-Rev here today. And D-Rev is a San Francisco-based design company that focuses on designing, building, and selling products for people living on less than $4 a day. Their latest product is the ReMotion Knee, which is a prosthetic knee that compares and performs just as well as comparable knees, but is 1/5 the price. So we're going to have D-Rev CEO Krista Donaldson speak about this product, as well as the PM, Vin Narayan, and they're going to have a short presentation, and afterward it'll be open for questions. So start thinking of what you want to ask them.
Thanks, Mona. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit started. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about my background and a little bit about D-Rev, and then about the knee, the ReMotion Knee, which is a prosthetic knee for above knee amputees. And so you'll see some pictures of people who've lost their leg above their knee. And then I thought I would share a few lessons learned that we've had along the way. And I would love questions, so definitely let me know. And then to introduce my colleague here, this is Vin, and he also, detailed questions, throw at him, it's good for him. Okay, does anyone know what the product is in this picture? Tooling. There is tooling there, but that's not what I'm getting at. I'll give you a hint, it's mild steel and it's Kenya. I won't make you suffer too long, but I'm going to make you suffer a little bit. Yes, a water pump. So what this is, what you're looking at is the super money maker, and this is actually, there are several super money maker pumps, and I know the name sounds a bit funny by Western standards, but it was meaningful to Kenyan farmers. But what this is a treadle pump, and this one actually works by tilting your body weight back and forth, and it enabled farmers, smallholder farmers, living like 2 hectares or less to be able to irrigate their farms, whereas before they had been dependent on rain and just pulling water out of the river. I'm showing you this picture though because I worked here for 4 years, and one of the things I learned is that what you're seeing here is some of my colleagues doing inspections on the manufacturing, and it was really boring work. And later on, Kickstart, the organization, they were called Aprotech at the time, decided to move manufacturing over to China, or most of it. And so keep this in mind, and I'm going to fold that back in later. So here's actually a picture of the main super money maker pump, and works like a stair-stepping machine, pulls water out of the ground and pushes it like another 8 meters. And this picture is actually from Mali. My job when I was there was manufacturing. And so that's why I was worried about things like, are people getting bored doing inspections? Because one of the key things I learned is it's not just about how well you design the product, but how well the product gets made and how consistently good the product is continued to be made. And this is an artisan at one of our manufacturers called Kenya Vehicle Manufacturers. After I worked in Kenya for a little while, I worked in Iraq, and I was like the super peon at the State Department. And what my job was basically to put out fires, literally, between like a lot of the contractors and the policymakers. And for those of you who followed Reconstruction in Iraq, you may have noticed that like what a lot of the policymakers were saying from a technical standpoint didn't really make sense. And my portfolio was electricity. And so here you see I'm actually standing in front of a power plant in Dora, which is just south of Baghdad. Big lesson learned there is the US government only really thought about trying to get the power up. Remember how I said that the policymakers were focused on kind of these things that didn't make sense? Well, one of them was, how many megawatts can we produce? I think any of us who remember our high school physics know it's actually not about megawatts, it's about megawatt hours. And what it really is about is if an Iraqi, at the end of the day, can flip a switch on the wall and their power comes on, right? The numbers are kind of meaningless. But the US government didn't think about, for example, where the fuel was going to come from to run these power plants. They were very busy rebuilding these power plants. They didn't think about where the power was going to go from the power plants and the transmission lines, which I have another picture for you. This is a transmission line between Baghdad and Dora, and it's very easy to bring one down. This is one of the super highways of power. There's only 4 going in and out of Baghdad. And you can strap an explosive to the leg. It's sad that I know this, and you can bring it down very quickly. And this would happen during election season. So the kind of the lesson learned for me, at least, was you can't just think about the thing, the power plant. You can't just think about the tower. You have to think about how the whole system works together. So that leads a little bit into D-Rev, the organization I lead now. And D-Rev is short for Design Revolution, and we are a nonprofit. And our mission is to empower poor people. And when we talk about poor people, what we really mean is people living on less than $4 a day. But we're really about them empowering themselves. So getting away from more of the traditional foreign aid model, which is giving and high cost and not necessarily high return in terms of social impact. But really looking to where do people want to empower their own lives and supporting that. We focus on two areas. And one of them is improving health and improving income. And they're not opposite ends. Some of the products we work on, like the knee, are actually both. If you can improve someone's mobility, you're actually improving their income. We also focus on products that scale. So one of our founders, Paul Polak, talks about products that at least reach 1 million. And sometimes he says 10 million. It really depends on his mood. But what I say is it's about a lot of people. We're working on problems that aren't necessarily at the village level. We're working on problems that ideally are at the global level. 3 things to know about us. One is that we design products that are world-class. And if you know a little bit about technology in the so-called developing world, you know that there's this history of appropriate technology, which is kind of like these rudimentary, low-cost, local materials products that were supposed to help people. What we're saying is, no, we're designing world-class products that if you're a parent, you would use here with your children. We don't believe that just because you're poor, you deserve products that are any less quality. So when we say world-class, we mean products that perform on par or better than the best products on the market. And this picture is actually from East Delhi. The picture's me getting some user feedback on one of our prototypes with some doctors there. The second thing to know about us is that we're market driven. And what that means is that we leverage the private sector to manufacture, distribute, and sell our products. And so again, kind of in contrast to the traditional foreign aid where things are donated or someone has to buy stuff and donate it. If you think about vaccines, for example, that's never going to be market driven. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but it's not going to be economically sustainable. We feel very strongly that the products we work on are market driven. And the reason is it holds us accountable. If you don't design a good product, people aren't going to buy it, right? But if you don't design a good product and you donate it, you kind of don't care. But what we really care about is social impact, and we want people to buy it, and that way it's economically sustainable. The key thing, though, of course, is if you're going to design something that's market-driven, it does have to be affordable. Next thing, and this is a picture of Vin. Let me just go back for a sec, too. One of the reasons I like these pictures is on the left-hand side. This is, I think, how we often think of markets in the developing world, but this is also a market. This is a medical device fair in Delhi, and our colleague Giant here on the side. The third thing about us is that we're user-obsessed. I know we all talk about user-centric design. We try and take it a step further. It's not just about the users or the stakeholders and everyone in that customer chain. It's about what's the context. How much power is there? Are there voltage surges? What's the temperature? What's the market look like? What's the landscape of other products? How are people meeting the need now? And if they're not meeting the need, why not? So a picture here of my colleague Vin in Ecuador talking to one of our amputees who's wearing our version 2 of the knee. So what do we do? So D-Rev is based in San Francisco. We like to say that we have 1 foot here in Silicon Valley and 1 foot in the places we work. If you think about the design process, and I know for those of you who develop products, this is a total oversimplification, and we agree. But identify is the problem. Identifying what the problem is, understanding the landscape. What's the market look like? What do the supply channels look like? How are things being met now? What are the challenges? Design is what we kind of think about design. Conceptual design, iterating, prototyping, moving down the way to design for manufacturability and getting ready for a market-ready product. And then delivery for things that we work on, which is hardware, is the manufacturing, the distribution, getting it from the manufacturing door to the end user. So marketing could be in there. If it's medical devices, what else might be in there? I'm going to pepper you guys with questions every once in a while. Does anyone know medical devices? What else do you need to worry about besides just, like, if I want to put a medical device out there, can I just go sell it?
No, you need certification.
Yes. In most places you do, it turns out not all of them. But this is something we worry about. And of course, if we're going to say we're going to develop a world-class product, we want to have external validation. It's not good enough, particularly, as a Western-based organization to come in and be like, we've designed this great product. How many times have people heard that before, right? So we look for external validation like regulatory approval or American Academy of Pediatrics standards. So that would go in here too. And then scaling is, I had mentioned how we're really looking for problems that are at a large scale. So just because something works in India doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in sub-Saharan Africa or Kenya or East Africa or even smaller markets, and trying to understand that and what's our strategy moving into where there's an existing real need. And then because we're a nonprofit, we want to measure the impact. And I'm very passionate about this measuring because I feel like you don't really understand if you're reaching your goals if you don't measure it, right? So, I mentioned we're a nonprofit. We say we like to act like a for-profit, and this has been really interesting for me as D-Rev has been growing a little bit because people kind of stumble on the nonprofit and they think about oh, you're the charity model, but no, because we take this market-driven approach, we're actually a lot like a for-profit. And it was kind of cool when one of our first products launched, people who were buying it didn't even know that a nonprofit was behind the product, which to us, that's great, because we want them to be buying the product based on its quality and the value that it's offering people. So to give you an idea of how our funding model works for something like this, we raise grants for R&D type money, for R&D type work in our design. And then, as I mentioned, we leverage the private sector. So for example, we'll license the design to a partner who will then manufacture, sell it, and distribute it. So we get income from our products, not very much because at the end of the day, our currency is impact. It's not financial return. We believe that our partners should have some skin in the game, and just like we want to sell our products to end users, we think that we should also sell our product to partners. So we have a little bit of income that comes in that will move around depending on who our target is. So for example, if we want to sell to public rural hospitals, we might say to our partner, we'll take less royalties to the more if you sell more to those types of clinics or hospitals. But we do raise a little bit of grant money to do this impact assessment. I would say particularly now, because we're a little bit of a young organization, we're learning how to do impact assessment, and we don't see a lot of examples of people doing really great impact assessment for these types of products. So we're going through a bit of a learning cycle on our own. Okay, so I'm going to start telling you a little bit about the knee. These are 3 gentlemen at the Jaipur clinic in India, and if you're from a place where you don't have much money and you don't have access to a lot of resources and you suffer an amputation, there aren't a lot of options for you. And you can see here, all 3 of them have bamboo staffs, and that's typical. People actually won't usually have a prosthesis at all when they come into the clinic, and so they'll be dependent on this kind of staff. So just kind of going through a very quick overview of what the options could be. This is a microcontroller knee. It's called the C-Leg, and I actually just saw a gentleman with this last week. And the minimum you're going to pay for something like this is $20,000. The gentleman I talked to paid $65,000, or he and his insurance company paid for it, which is way too much. But this is something like, for example, US vets coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan may be fit with. It's a smart device. This is a polycentric knee, and what that just means is a 4-bar mechanism. I'm going to talk about that again in a minute, that more mimics the natural walking motion. The minimum you're going to pay for something like this is about $1,400. So a device that doesn't have pneumatics and like some fancy stuff in there could go, $1,400 maybe up to $6,000 or $7,000. And then this, and I brought some props. Thanks, Ben. This is an International Red Cross knee. And it's single axis, so you can see it rotates around the axis, so like a door hinge. And this is designed for poor people, essentially. And I think in some ways this is kind of typifies what you saw with appropriate technology, like lower quality for people who don't have much. And what we know is that in many cases we hear anecdotally from prosthetists we work with is that people were in a locked position. So kind of like a peg leg. And I'll pass this around if you want to play with it. So that would be attached to a socket. Yeah, and actually, why don't I just show you the leg system now?
You don't have the $20,000 one?
I don't, sorry. And if I did, I don't know if I'd pass it around. Okay, so don't look at the knee because you want that to be a surprise later, okay? But you have a socket, and then you have an attachment that goes to a knee, and then you have a pylon that goes to a foot. And this is actually a Jaipur leg system if you were to go to the Jaipur clinic in India and be fit with something.
That's the 4-bar, right?
Yes, yes, but I don't want to ruin it, the surprise. So I'll pass it around though. I won't make you suffer again. Okay, and I'm showing you a video of a man in India, and he's wearing a single axis knee similar to, we actually have a single axis knee here. It's actually, there's hinges on both sides of his knee, but it's essentially a single axis. And I like this video because when we think about prosthetics, and the medical device industry thinks about prosthetics, they're thinking about here. They're thinking about generally flat surfaces, even stairs, not a lot of dust, and that's not the reality of much of the world. So I'm going to pass this around. And in this video, you may have noticed too, is even though he has the ability to flex his knee with a single axis, he's wearing it in a locked position. So you can see that it's cosmetically awkward. It's clear he's an amputee, and it's physically exhausting. And particularly with older patients, you can just imagine what this would be like. So the problem that the original team that looked at this is, for those who suffer above knee amputations and you live on less than $4 a day, there's just really no options. And what's the scale of the knee need? The knee need. It's about 3 million amputees a year who need a new knee or a replacement. And so you can see the bulk is in Asia, and we actually know that about 500,000 of those are in India. And this is every year. The knee that I'm passing around now is what we call the version 1, the Jaipur knee. And this was originally developed by a group of students at Stanford that Vin was later a part of. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. This is the single axis knee. Back up. This single axis knee that's going around is the little one. Do you see the little one? Okay, hold it up, perfect. Okay, this is a door hinge. This is what the Jaipur Foot Organization had when they approached Stanford several years ago. And then a student team, which Vin was later a part of, developed the Jaipur knee, which is the version 1 of the ReMotion knee. And you can see there's a big difference in the walking motion. The first knee lacks stability because as your weight shifts over that axis, you're going to lose stability. And this is a polycentric knee. One of the things I like to mention too is with the design of the Jaipur knee, which is now the ReMotion knee, it allows a lot of behaviors that are more normal in this kind of situation. A lot of people sit cross-legged. This is a young amputee named Vishambar, and you can't see his knee, but he's fit with one of our knees. There's a lot of kneeling for prayer, squatting, all sorts of things that a lot of Western devices aren't actually really well designed for, and that we recognize that in the design process. So here's the version 1 of the Jaipur knee, and is the leg system around? I'm going to borrow it back. Can I borrow it back? I'll give it back to you. Thanks. So what I thought I would do is walk you through the iterations of the knee, because now we're on the V3. But the first thing is, can anyone tell me what might be wrong if you're an amputee and you're wearing this? You're clicking, and no one wants to click. And if you think about it, here there's a stigma attached to being disabled. It's that much more in many of the places we work. And we saw this with how users modified their knees. So here what you see is someone had actually put a bit of cloth in there to dampen out the noise. Another thing we saw is if you're wearing this under pants or a skirt, is it obvious? Yeah, there's a sharp edge here. And I mean, it was designed like this because it was early prototype. It works very well for what it does. But you know, the students hadn't quite worked through the entire process. And we see that too with patients. Wrapping things around the knee is very common, so that it's not quite so obvious when you're sitting down that there's a prosthetic under your skirt or pants. So that led to the Q2 knee, which I'll give back this one. Thanks. Thanks, Vin. So a couple of differences when you pass this around, you may notice that there's anyone know what this rubber is? Noise dampener. This is a little loose, but I promise it doesn't click. So there's a noise dampener right here. Also, you may notice that the curvature is much smoother to bring down, to make it not quite so obvious. The other thing you may notice too, actually you probably won't notice, the attachment. We changed the attachment. On this one over here, we used an attachment that was specific to the Jaipur Foot Organization, was actually threaded, and that's not ideal for alignment and for fitting. So we changed it to a more universal adapter, so it'd be applicable to a broader range of clinics. And now we're on the version 3, which we just launched last month. And if you're holding, most of you haven't held the V2 yet, but you'll notice it's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit wider. And in fact, some of the feedback Vin got in China was like, this may be fine for you Westerners, but it's a little bit big for us. meaning Westerners are a little bit more overweight. So the other thing that we were very cognizant of too is if you want to have a truly affordable product at high quality, it needs to be mass produced, right? This is CNC, computer numerical control, cut out with a mill over and over again. Not the most affordable, not the best use of resources. What is this? Injection molded mostly. Yeah, so you'll see when you pass it around, it's also much narrower. I think we calculated 26% narrower, and you'll see it's much lighter. And then what we think it's going to cost $80. So this knee actually is going into field trials now, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute. But we are hoping for it to hit the market early next year at a retail price of $80. So not a cost of goods or a bill of material, but a retail cost.
That's just for the
Sorry, no, it's okay.
What's the material?
Material is
It is polycarbonate.
polycarbonate. Yeah.
Is that just for the knee itself? What about the extension and the foot? Is that
So
separate?
yeah, that's separate. So the knee itself would be $80.
Mhm. They're all designed and sold modularly, so usually people are buying one component from one place, another component, and then the way that they're connected is standardized, so you can match up products from different manufacturers.
Yes.
Is the knee the same from a child to?
Great question. So I'm going to repeat the questions for our audience that's not here. The question is the knee the same for an adult versus a child? It's based on weight. So depending on how large the child is, they can wear our knee. But actually, one of the things we're interested in is redesigning the knee at another point for children, too, or having a second knee. It's a great question. Any others before we move on? Sure.
Does the $80 cover the marginal cost of manufacturing and
Yes.
distribution?
Yes. Yeah, and actually, we're hoping we can get it lower. I think one of the critical things in this field is people get really excited about a product and they put out a price based on how much they think it's going to cost to make it. And then once they figure out distribution costs and tariffs and fees, mystery fees and all sorts of things, getting them into countries, the price goes up a lot. And from my standpoint, one of the things I really learned working in Kenya is consumer trust is so critical. And if you put out a price that something's going to be, $80, but you come back and you say, no, actually it's going to be $200, you've already have one level of trust that you've lost. So we built in margins based on the best research we could do, and then we put a little extra in for what we don't know, which we think will be something.
Were there any trade-offs in terms of the product lifetime, like lifespan, in terms of the reduction in costs and whether or not that means that they would have to replace it sooner, or if it's comparable to what the previous ones were?
Yeah, well, there's standards that we have to meet, and I'll let Vin give you the detailed answer, but essentially there are standards that say what the lifetime of a product must be.
Yeah, so we hit the exact same lifetime that Western devices do. In fact, I think we go a little bit further because to hit that life that they state, they also say you can't get it wet, you can't use it in dirty conditions, you have to service it every 6 months, which isn't really a reality for the context we're working in. And so we're designing it to hit that same lifetime, but without any of those requirements on top.
One of the things we learned is, obviously, like Vin said, the testing is kind of based on Western wear. And one of the things we really had to think about during the product specifications is, well, actually, what is our user going to be faced with? And we know there's a huge rural population that would be using our knee. They're going to be in fields. It's going to be wet. It's going to be dusty, like you saw with the gentleman in the rough terrain. And so how do we make sure that when we do the mechanical testing here, we account for that? Because we don't want to be discovering that when it's on our test users, right? So yeah, these are all things that we're trying to stay ahead of. So this is Kamal, the young man earlier who you saw working on our knee, and he actually climbed a tree later. So we love this picture of him. So I had mentioned earlier how you have to measure to know if you're hitting impact. And so with all of our projects, we're very clear about what the goals are. And with this project, it's to remobilize people. Remobilize above knee amputees. And we have usually 2 to 3 meta indicators we use with all of our projects. So for the knee project, we look at number of amputees fit, which is a little bit of an output. For example, just how many knees are there being worn. And then just to kind of give you a little bit of color is that this knee is now in 12 different countries, or we have a knee in 12 different countries, mostly the V1 knee. But I think the really meaningful impact number is compliance. And compliance means, is an amputee still wearing the knee 6 months later, right? Because that more tells you, are you really truly remobilizing people? With the goal being increased income, increased access, increased participation in life. And our compliance rate is about 79%, which is great. It's not good enough, we don't think. But as a sense of perspective, the ICRC knee system is about 65%. And what we have learned through getting feedback on the product, and where's the leg system?
It's actually the version, the previous Jaipur knee.
Oh, the previous, sorry, okay.
65.
So also single axis, so,
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, okay. Is anyone at the leg system? That's right here. One of the things that we've actually found is that compliance, one of the things that hurts us, when you talk to amputees and you say, what would you change about it? Usually the first thing they would say is, I'm not an amputee, I'm not an amputee. But the second thing they would say is, the socket gives a lot of problems. So when you see this compliance number, it's actually, are you still wearing your leg system? What's been interesting for us, if you think back that our goal is remobilizing people, it's made us think about what could be our potential next projects, right? So it's not just about the knee. We know that the socket has a lot of issues too, because people's residual limb changes over time. It changes just based on a variety of things, and blistering is a real issue. Give this back to you. Thanks. So I thought besides the numbers, I thought I would share a few patient stories. And this is a young woman named Purnima. And she lost her leg in a car accident. It was actually fairly tragic, and she lost her little brother. One of the things that's really amazing about her, to me, I think as a female engineer particularly, is that when she was remobilized with one of our knees, is she said to us, I want to go back to school and I want to become an engineer. And I love that story because at the end of the day, like, we don't necessarily want people like us and people based in the West working on projects to solve the problems, but people like Purnima addressing some of the issues she sees locally. This is also another funny story. So Andreas on the left is wearing our version 2 knee. The version 2 is actually only fit on 5 amputees down in Ecuador because we were testing the noise dampener and things like that before moving on to wanting to injection mold it. But Andreas had lost his leg in a motorcycle accident, and I'm laughing because one of the things he was most excited about being remobilized was to get back on the motorcycle. So here you see him here quite happy to have his new knee with his friend. So to give you a sense of where we are now with the knee, this is, I had mentioned the 12 countries, and hopefully these dots add up to 12, but this is where our knee is in use right now through our partnership with the Jaipur Foot Clinic. So they actually have a central clinic in Jaipur, India. They have 22 other clinics around India, Delhi, basically name your major city, and they have a smaller clinic there. But they also do camps in other places, and so they fit the version 1 knee in all of these other countries. As I mentioned, we're just starting our version 3 field trials, and we're doing that in 5 different countries. As of last week, Vin just returned from Indonesia, 2 clinics in Indonesia that are trying out our version 3 knee. And here's a picture actually of the first amputee fit in Bali, and we love his smile. And actually, this is our colleague Sam behind him checking out alignment. And what we're really looking for in these field trials is, does it work essentially? Do we see an increase in income, increase in quality of life? But also, are there any things that we need to know before we really scale up into mass production? Are there any feature tweaks or anything that we need to be changing? And so we have a 6-month study running at each of these sites where we're getting feedback on all of these things. So one of the things I'd like to mention too, even though this project, we haven't done a lot of PR about it, Stanford did in the early days with the version 1, but we've gotten inquiries from all of these different places. And what's been really interesting to me is that we've also gotten inquiries from the US. Patients who either don't have insurance, or people, for example, who have a very active lifestyle, often vets, who come back and they don't want to be using that $20,000 knee to go to the beach or to go kayaking. So I think a takeaway for us is that there's a need globally, not just, in our target populations where they live on less than $4 a day. Okay, so I thought I would share a few lessons learned because I don't want you to think that we have everything figured out. We're far from that. And I am just to tell you what this is, because you saw this earlier, these are some of the early sketches that went into the design of the V3. We feel very strongly that people should be proud of their prosthetic, and at least it should fit with them in their lives. So we worked with a volunteer industrial designer who did these renderings that led to the V3 design. So this is a picture of a prosthetics clinic in Kenya that I went to go visit last year, and actually I was there for one of our other projects, but I wanted to find out about this clinic and how it worked in Kenya. Couldn't get them to answer the phone, which is not unusual, so we just dropped in. And 4 skilled prosthetists, which is not necessarily unusual, but it's pretty cool. Like one of the big challenges we see with getting people remobilized is they might have, for example, in Haiti, they might have a lot of donated technology, but they don't have the skilled prosthetists to fit people. But these 4 prosthetists were really busy not doing much of anything. And the reason was because they could not get all the components to that leg system that we talked about into the clinic. So they were waiting on components to come in. And in the meantime, even though they had amputees who needed to be fit, they weren't actually fitting people. So a lesson learned, well, actually relearned, because I mentioned this came up with one of my lessons learned in Kenya, is impact is more than the product, right? It's about getting the product to people, getting the product to people who need it. And going back to our model of market-driven, one of the reasons why we're market-driven is because if people see value in your product, they're going to buy it. And if they see value in your product, they're going to use it. But you have to get it to them. So another kind of reminder takeaway is if you really truly, if your focus is impact, you've got to think much beyond the product or the thing itself and think about that whole system, right? The next thing we've really learned is good design is global. And my hope is that the foreign aid community is seeing this. Because we still get a lot of questions of like, well, why are you based in Silicon Valley? And I'm like, the best products in the world take a global approach. And what you're looking at here is the design process and effort by our various partners and us that we've put into the design process. And these little lines actually do correspond to like minute design activities. But if you look at it, Stanford did a lot of the early work, if you remember the student group, and the Jaipur Foot Organization. So these are color-coded, if you can read below. And then we took over from the student group, or they merged into us. But as you can see, there's lots of different players. We have Northwestern did a little bit. We have partner clinics who've contributed a lot. We've had industry experts who've contributed a lot. And my point with this is it's not just about one organization. One organization can't do this. It's about a partnership of ideally the best organizations in the space. And so we have partners in India. We now have partners in Indonesia. We have partners all over the world. Manufacturing might be in China. But bringing together what we think is the best for the end user for us to meet our goals. Okay, and then the last thing is we think this model scales, like what we're doing at D-Rev. And I alluded to one of the other projects we're working on. This is Brilliance. It's a phototherapy device. It's this thing right here, the blue light, and it treats babies with severe jaundice. And we don't think much about jaundice here in the United States, but it's actually a big problem in many parts of the developing world. Particularly, there are certain areas where people have a genetic marker that makes them more susceptible to jaundice. And if you don't treat jaundice, babies can suffer brain damage from very minor to very severe, or they can die. And so it's also hard to collect data about it. So the medical community is now, trying to deal with it, but at the same time, there's not a lot of good data. And we started this project, like the knee project, when a user comes to us, in this case, and says this is a problem. I'm just going to really quickly mention where we are with that. So Brilliance actually hit the market through our Indian partner Phoenix in November. And we're at impact now. I mentioned that we have like these meta indicators. Number of babies treated, and this is for 105 devices that are now installed in hospitals. Over 2,000 babies treated. Number 2 is what we call babies otherwise, and this is counting babies who otherwise would not have received effective treatment if there had been no Brilliance. And then last is that we're able to determine the number of deaths and disabilities averted by our product. And Brilliance retails for about $400 compared to other phototherapy devices that are usually $3,000 and up, ones that meet American Academy of Pediatrics standards. And because you're Google, I had to put in our favorite Google Fusion map. So one of the things we've been trying to do is track where the devices are and where they've been installed. And so just in the last 7 months, you can see that mostly India. One of the things we're really excited about is that a public tender was filled, and that's when the government purchases devices, which we're really excited about because we know that those get put into public hospitals, and public hospitals we know is where the greatest need for these phototherapy devices are. We've seen devices get sold into the Philippines. We've seen them get sold to Uganda. Nigeria, and now Ghana, which for me is really exciting after you have this like long design process, you know, from the early days to commercialization. So I wanted to mention a few reasons why we're particularly thankful to Google too. The first one is that working with Googlers and Zooglers, we won the Hack for Good hackathon a few months ago. And here you can see our team, Nicole over here with Zooglers and Googlers, so thank you. The other thing is that we're part of a pilot that Google is doing. Has anyone heard of One Today? Awesome. Okay, so we're part of that. My understanding is it's still in beta, so look for it please and download the app, but it's a micro giving, so you can give $1 or $2 to an organization, and we're one of the pilot organizations. And then we also recently won a Google Alumni Impact Award, so Google has been very good to us, so thank you for that. And the last thing, what I thought I would do is end with, you're getting a sneak preview, actually, this is really exciting. So we had a volunteer filmmaker who works with the Extreme Affordability class at Stanford. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but some of our board members are the professors for that class. But he said, I'm going to India, can I film some things for you? And we said, we would love you to capture a patient's story. And so he captured the story of Dinesh, who's 12 years old. He'd asked about children. And this is the Jaipur Foot Organization in Delhi.
मेरा नाम दिनेश है। जब मैं स्कूल से लौट रहा था तो मैं बस में चढ़ के जा रहा था तो उसमें गेट बंद हो गया था, तो मुझे पैर रखने का जगह नहीं मिला था। फिर मैं नीचे गिर पड़ा था, तभी बस मेरे ऊपर से चली गई थी। यहाँ पे आकर एक उधर सफदरजंग में गए थे ना, तो एक डॉक्टर जी ने यहाँ की सूचना दी कि यहाँ पे जाइए, फिर हम यहाँ पे आए थे। मैं 7th क्लास में पढ़ता हूँ। मैं चेस, लूडो, क्रिकेट यही पहले जब लगाया था तब थोड़ा थोड़ा गिरता था, फिर अब ठीक हूँ। चलने के अलावा खेल सकता हूँ, इधर उधर जा सकता हूँ घूमने।
इसमें क्या फर्क है? मतलब जब तुम्हें पहली बार पैर लगा तो तुम्हें कैसा लगा?
मुझे लगा मैं चल सकता हूँ।
So one of the reasons why we're also really excited about this is because I think as a technology organization with a lot of engineers, we've had a hard time storytelling and learn to storytell. So like stories like Dinesh, you know, we work with our amputees and we're out talking to people, but it's amazing to have someone help us tell the story of the work we're doing. So I get teared up every time I see this, so don't mind me. So the last thing I want to show you is invite you actually. D-Rev a couple times a year has what we call open studios, and what that is we just open our doors. We get a lot of requests for tours and meetings and things like that, and we love actually having the community come in and ask us questions if they're interested. We can show you prototypes. You can grab a drink. Anyway, the next one is going to be July 17th, so we'd love to have you. If you're in San Francisco, we're up in the Dog Patch neighborhood. If you're familiar with the city, just Google it, you'll be fine. Last thing is thank you. So thank you for coming today, and I'd love your questions. Yeah.
All right. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. I noticed that your focus is sustainability,
Economic sustainability.
economic sustainability, scalability, growth, right, and then as well as solving a global purpose, right. I noticed that you're in a lot of countries. What's the percentage of the countries that are donating to the cause, and then it's a compounded question. And then you also note that the cost of getting and importing the goods into the countries can sometimes vary, right? And that's often dealt with.
And the regulatory totally varies too, and the registration, all of that varies.
So, are there discussions? Is it possible to have the countries' State Department, instead of donating necessarily funds, or in addition to donating funds, relax importation requirements and duties and fees that way.
That would be so forward-thinking of governments.
Because it's mobilizing their economy, mobilizing their
Yeah. Let me tell you a few anecdotes. You're touching on like 10 really great points in the things you're saying. So we're actually going through a bit of scaling strategy with Brilliance, the phototherapy device that you saw now, and that partly there's such high need. And we're trying to obviously match that up with demand. And what we've learned, for example, if you look at South America, like there's some countries that like the economic conditions are just such that there's no way a foreign entity, nonprofit or not, is going to address. There's another South American country I won't mention that there's one of the biggest makers of phototherapy devices in the world, and 90% of hospitals do not have a functional phototherapy device. And that's because that company is unwilling to bring the cost down to what the local hospitals can afford to pay. So we're going from corruption all the way to bureaucracy to all sorts of things, yeah.
So then that leads me into my other question, which I had, which was regarding managing your supply base, right?
Yeah.
So you obviously have, figured out that you want to make an inherent interest in your supply base to bring the cost down so they can sell more goods.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys manage the forward and reverse logistics, or is that outsourced to your supply base?
It depends. And I want to go back to your question too about our local groups donating. And Vin can talk more about this, but with prosthetics clinics, it's actually we sell to the clinics. And when we're doing the field trials, one of the things I didn't mention is we have to understand our end users. We also have to understand our paying customer, which is the clinic itself. Those clinics raise money locally usually. Some clinics will charge fees or sliding fees. So we do see local money coming in to address the problem. I don't know, do you want to add more onto that too? But then just to answer your second question really quickly is it depends on the product. With Brilliance, we partnered with Phoenix Medical Systems, the biggest maker of neonatal equipment in India. With the knee, we're going to manage more of that supply chain because of some of the challenges we saw, and then that there aren't major players already in the space who can do it. Let me hand over to Vin.
I think that's just a somewhat, I don't know if it's unique, but it's something that we are very proud of at D-Rev, that when we do the design process, it's not limited to just the engineering or technology aspects. We're also looking at what does the distribution market look like for that product, and it can change from device to device. We have a different distribution model for the knee than we do from Brilliance, and that's all based on what's available and what we think the best path to scaling is.
And best path to impact. And I would say that the philosophy and the core tenets stay the same. It needs to be market driven, but the path there we're really doing based on what we think is doable, but also what's best for the end user. The other thing I would add is if you remember that nice, neat arrow of the design process, that we also know there's a lot of iteration, it's much messier. But in that early stage of identification, we're really trying to understand all of those things. And we're, in some ways, like to back up what Vin's saying, is we're designing the delivery model in addition to the product, and very much using a design process for that whole system.
I just had a question because I really admire the kind of structure you have that's very sustainable, and I think inherent in that structure is a focus on the end user, which I really like. So my question is, are there other companies or nonprofits that you kind of modeled this after, and were there any lesson learned in kind of the overall structure that you guys chose for your nonprofit?
I'll try and answer that delicately. I feel like a lot of the model and the approach that D-Rev takes is recognition of where, in many ways, the aid sector has failed people. And I hate to say that because I don't want to put everyone in a basket, because there's a lot of great work that's obviously happening. But a lot of these things, like I saw in Kenya and Iraq and some of the other places I've worked, and I know Vin has a lot of experiences working with prosthetics clinics. And really, I feel like if we're not designing for the end user and for the impact, then what are we doing? So everything, I feel like when we're making decisions, it all comes back to what's best for impact and what's best for the end user. And also say one of the challenges we've had is, like I had mentioned earlier, is getting our impact assessment up and running, because the impact assessment kind of traditional model is focused, for example, in health on DALYs, disability life adjusted years, which is kind of meaningless to end users and doctors. It's a very global health thing. And we feel like, if we're focused on end users, we need to really understand what their needs are, and understanding if they're using the product and how many babies are using it. And one of the things I wanted to keep the focus on the knee today, but Brilliance, we can actually track the number of babies that are being treated by the device, which helps us do impact assessment. And so we're always trying to figure out how to do things very efficiently because we don't fit into the mold of a traditional product nonprofit. So if you see other groups, I mean, there's a lot of great groups out there, but if you see other groups too, we're all ears because I feel like we've definitely struggled through a lot of lessons learned, as you can see, and like we're changing our path, but we're, as much as possible, we try and learn from what other groups have been through.
I think it's also important to note that the approach depends on what products you're working on. It's not a one-fit approach, as Krista mentioned, for every nonprofit. So just like we had to pick the approach that we think is most likely to lead to impact, we also have to pick products and projects that best fit our approach. Like we'll never do a vaccine product, that's not going to happen, but and that's not to say that this is the right way to do vaccines, but we pick products that work well with our approach and that we think can scale easily that way.
I would also add that we're very pragmatic at the end of the day. You know, we're 10 people. So, you know, we're very clear about what we can and what we can't do. With jaundice, the biggest need is actually screening, but that takes a huge capital investment. It would take probably about 5 more staff. So we can't do that until we're at a different stage. We also felt like it didn't make sense to have screening before there's treatment in place, right? So I think one of the things that I feel like is one of our core strengths is that we have the ability to say, no, we actually can't do this. Like it's beyond our scope, our skill set, our everything, and this is best for another organization. We've actually, now that we have a little bit more impact, we have groups coming to us and we try and match them with groups that can carry the projects forward.
That was a good segue for my question. First of all, I think you guys are doing really spectacular work, and this has been really awesome to just hear it from you live. My question was actually about impact evaluation. So you mentioned that you're kind of setting up, you know, how you're going to be evaluating impact going forward. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on kind of where you're focusing on for Brilliance or some of the other products that you're working with. And also I know there's a couple of nonprofits that focus solely on providing impact evaluation expertise to other nonprofits. So is that a direction you're looking for?
We looked at that, yeah. So how about I give like the meta answer, and then I would love Vin to talk about the trials a little bit, because we've done what I think is an incredible job of setting up data collection with the field trials. So on the meta levels, we've tried to work with some of the very well-known impact assessment groups, but one of the challenges we've run into is that we're very impact focused, and a lot of those groups are led by academics who need to publish, and there's not necessarily an overlap in those two things. So we've said, can you please take our project, we need third-party evaluation. We would actually love third-party evaluation and for you to teach us what you're doing so that we can do it in future, and we haven't been successful so far. And that's something that I know a board member on one of those, and I've been bugging him about it. I think, again, we try and keep things very pragmatic, but I would love you to talk about maybe the knee.
Sure. So I think one of the challenges we just set up this 100-unit trial, and it's going to be running for the next 6 months or so. And one of the challenges with looking for an outside impact group was that we needed such a specific set of evaluation that I think it was going to be difficult to set that up for such a short period of time. So what we did was really look at what as we think were the best practices that some other groups were doing and try to implement that in our approach. So for example, we looked at well-established prosthetics evaluation metrics and gait metrics and tried to take questions from existing studies that had been vetted and incorporate that into ours, and then sort of combine that with other things that maybe aren't part of the traditional prosthetic study, like what is the change in income 6 months later, or things about socioeconomic status and how those are changing, as well as talking to some other nonprofit groups and looking at the impact work that they're doing and how they're doing it. A good example is that we met with one really amazing group in New York that uses Dropbox actually to sync.
It's the little details that make all the difference.
And it was like such a, why didn't we think of that kind of moment?
We were like having them fill out forms.
Yeah. And then,
like, no, they can just load it into Dropbox and then it magically appears. And
yeah, like let Dropbox do the hard part of it. And so it was such a...
Yeah, we'll move to that. Much better, Doc.
Stage 2.
That's right. We're getting better and better.
Yes. But little things like that, and just kind of seeing what people were doing and incorporating the best practices and making it fit our approach really well was, I think, a really good lesson learned.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that thanks to the SEED program at Stanford, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this big grant that the business school got at Stanford, to support enterprise creation in low-income economies. But we managed to finagle a fellow named Sarah Tollefson, and she's our official director of impact. And I felt very strongly that impact needs to be managed by somebody who works on all of the different teams. And Sarah's got a really interesting background. And in fact, she's not a traditional impact person. She's a lawyer who worked on Truth and Reconciliation in West Africa and a few other interesting things. But she's very detail-oriented, which I think is the primary job requirement. So she works with Vin and other people. And we're trying to do some interesting things too, like to get the data off the Brilliance machines, for example, like the number of hours that it's been used. We are now working with Medic Mobile to do SMSs to doctors and get the data back. We're trying to combine it with site visits. We're also running a few tests and collecting data, like incentivizing with SMS, calling ahead of time, and then kind of comparing all these different models to figure out what's the most efficient way to do that is least intrusive to our users. So we have a lot of things, and I think we're a little bit like you guys. Like, we like to try a lot of things and collect data and then go forward from that.
Yeah, so I noticed that your organization really pushes using the market to make great products, and I'm just wondering if there's any collaboration with existing organizations like the Red Cross that have tried to build a design that isn't that great, and they have massive resources, like a lot of people. They probably have distribution channels that you don't have access to. So I was wondering if there's any collaboration between D-Rev and larger nonprofits in addition to, like, the hospitals and other partners that you're working with.
Yeah, I think the easy answer for that is just that we're always open to new partnerships, and for a group like that had the distribution channels in place, that would be a great partner to work with, and so we're always open to things like that. We're not working with them right now. We are sort of
We're trying. To answer your question very directly is yes. We try and work with the best people in the field, with the best people with the best distribution channels. I'll be honest, I feel like until recently, they're just like, oh, it's another student group, and we're like, we're not students. We're actually developing stuff and they're getting used. So I feel like we're just building credibility now. But yeah, I mean, every time I see certain leaders of other organizations that I know are donating or buying devices, I'm like, hey, have you seen the knee? Are you interested in buying Brilliance? And we're just starting to get traction now. So totally yes.
You mentioned earlier that when you're identifying projects, you try to fit it to your approach. I just wanted to hear more about what other factors you consider when thinking about new projects. When people approach, do you kind of have people approach you, or do you do kind of base on from root need finding? How does that look like?
A bit of everything. So we have a lot of new needs that come into us. People approach us. The Brilliance project started with a doctor coming. The knee started with the Jaipur Foot Organization going to Stanford. Because we're in so many hospitals and clinics, we see a lot of things, and we talk to doctors and we learn about new things. It's been really interesting with people coming to us with needs. Often if they're Westerners, they're coming to us with solutions. They're not actually coming to us with needs. So they'll come in and say, oh, this thing is going to solve X. And I'm like, well, what's the problem? And what's also really interesting is if you dig into the problem, it's often not a problem. And so we do a lot of due diligence too to really understand the problem. And one of my favorite professors at Stanford used to always try and get your problem statement to the next level. Like if you say, oh, I need light. Well, what do you need the light for? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Is it children need to do homework, or after dark, or they need to be able to sell, they want to keep their business open after dark on a road? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And if you can get there, that's a good place to start. We have a framework that we kind of run needs through, and it's everything pragmatic from is this our sweet spot? Are there key opinion leaders who think this is an issue? Will the key opinion leaders advise us? Because as you can imagine, getting in the door with the largest maker of neonatal equipment in India we just can't walk up and say hi. So are there a lot of these conditions met that we think that we have a high success rate of moving forward? And so that identify phase that I showed you with the arrow, it's more than just kind of need identification, talking to a few customers. It's a very intensive due diligence process, which has been really interesting because, for example, funders aren't interested in throwing money at you to just go research stuff. You have to go research that on your own and then come back and say, okay, this is a real problem that we feel very strongly about, and there are these users who say this is an issue, and this is the scale-up plan or the development plan.
And I can tell you a little bit about what that conversation went with the knee, because when it started, the student team just had to worry mostly about the technology because there was already a partner to scale it. But when we were deciding whether or not we should take it forward as an independent project and try to scale it, I think the questions really are, and these are the same questions that D-Rev asks, like, can we develop it, or is there a need for the type of things that we think we're really good at, and are there partners available for the other areas? Is that a ripe space? Are there enough people doing the other aspects of it? So the questions for us were, okay, if we make a device, are there clinics that can fit it? Are there distributors that will be able to sell it? How much regulatory work or other upfront costs will we need to get into it? And at the end of all of that, will it still be affordable enough for the people that it needs to get to? And if the answers are yes, I think that is a really ripe area for D-Rev to explore.
We're really looking where there's a huge social need and an unmet market that we think we can design for affordably.
So I noticed in the video at the very end that the young patient was saying that in the hospital, my doctor told me I should come here, which sounds like the old-fashioned way of getting information out. You know, ideally, patients who need your technology should know exactly what's available. So what are your thoughts about how you're going to make sure that people who need knees know what they can have?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'd love Vin to address this too. I mean, one of the challenges, again, if you go back to our goal of remobilization, a lot of amputees just don't know that the product is available. And, you know, we don't, other than working with patients to understand the fitting and what they go through, our partner who really interfaces is the Jaipur Foot Organization. And we know that they do media campaigns and they'll drive into communities and they do these camps, but that's actually a huge problem. And one of the things that we're dealing with now with Brilliance is actually SEOs, because we know we have target countries that really need this product. If they type in phototherapy device, like we want them to see Brilliance, right? Because we know that the price point is perfect. So this is part of what we're really learning, I would say, with the delivery phase. Do you want to add anything to that? Because I think this is a big issue with amputees.
And we're seeing that there's limitations to scaling both on the supply and demand side. So on the supply side, it's all the typical problems. There's not enough clinics. They don't have access to what they need. On the demand side, it's a lot of times people just don't know what's available. And we're hoping that that problem is reducing. We're seeing a lot of clinics approaching it with some innovative techniques. So some clinics do radio broadcasts when they're going to a new area, or some people are putting out web hits. And we're starting to get more and more inquiries from people in country just from the information we have on the web. We don't know if that's just because we're only reaching the web savvy clinics and maybe there's this whole other suite that isn't. But we see a really good tactic in taking what works best in some areas and trying to spread those best practices to other clinics so that they're able to get the word out better as well.
Let's just give them a round of applause.
Thank you.